Hey YouTube, welcome back to Sparkstarter channel. I'm doing a special presentation for our 99th video. This is an important topic. I started this channel 10 years ago, and my first video was about energy and energy perspectives over time. So it's actually an interesting video. It doesn't get a lot of play on YouTube, but it's energy history over 50 years, U.S. energy history. But today I want to do a little history about Pittsburgh. My family's been in the Pittsburgh area for over 100 years. So they've seen most of what I'm about to share with you. And it's been a source of debate. And it is the population collapse that occurred in Pittsburgh from the 1950s to the 1990s. And so let's get into the presentation. This is peak Pittsburgh population collapse from 1950 to 1990. And what you can see here is a picture. This is a picture on the north side of Pittsburgh. You can see the bustling city streets with the cars and the stores, and more or less this same block has been pretty much paved over. So all the businesses and people that live there have been relocated. So I'm going to define population collapse as a reduction of 50% or more in population. So what do you mean when I say collapse? Collapse is a reduction by 50% or more in the number of people that lived here. Some of these pictures that you'll see in the presentation are from the book Pittsburgh, Then and Now. It does a good job of capturing how the city's changed over the last century. So again, what you'll see here is the sort of hillside full of houses and businesses, and it is more or less paved over now. So why did the population of Pittsburgh collapse? So this is kind of an interesting question, and it's been some debate. Ultimately, people left because all the jobs left, but why did the jobs leave? And so this is the population curve of Pittsburgh that starts in 1800 and goes up to 2020. And this population curve is not just for Pittsburgh. All the neighboring cities in the Appalachian region, from Youngstown, Ohio, Cleveland, Ohio, Wheeling, West Virginia, have the same or similar population curves that peak in the 1950s and 60s and then collapse all the way up till the 2020s. Again, I just want to show you these are the curves for Cleveland, Youngstown, and Wheeling, West Virginia. You see a similar population collapse in all of these cities. So what drove the collapse is the question. And where did all the jobs go? So here's another picture of Pittsburgh, one with the booming steel industry, and now with more or less that steel plant has been torn down, paved over, and here's an image of it with as a parking lot. Since then, they've built some apartments over in this area, but this was from the Then and Now book. But you can see how things have changed. So I don't like to get into politics on the Sparkstarter channel, but I think it's kind of interesting because if you have sort of different political views, you're going to have different explanations for the population collapse. And these are some of the reasons that people give for the depopulation of Pittsburgh. If people with more of a democratic lean, there's a failure to invest in infrastructure, failure to adopt new technologies, outsourcing of jobs for cheap labor overseas. There was a failure to invest in people or the education or the social programs. On the Republican side, you get excuses like there were too many regulations and made it hard for us to build factories. There's rising cost of materials, rising costs of taxes, took all the capital we had to invest. The unions made labor too expensive, and the welfare social programs, they were just disincentivizing people to, to do hard work like they used to do in the steel mills. And it seems to me some of these things are more or less contradict each other, and I never really bought into any of the canned explanations. So it's possible that all these things could have kind of happened in a perfect storm, and the scapegoat stuff happened, then the industry and communities declined, and then the people left. However, I tend to see something else happen in behind the scenes that caused the industry and the communities to kind of falter. People started to leave, and then we kind of come up with all these sort of scapegoat excuses that are politically contentious topics. So I think there's an objective reason why this collapse happened, and my pet theory is it is about energy. So the reason Pittsburgh is located where it is isn't because Andrew Carnegie loved kayaking on the Three Rivers. It's because Pittsburgh is centrally located in one of the country's largest coal fields. And the Three Rivers facilitated bringing all of the coal in this coal field and concentrating it in Pittsburgh. So that's why Pittsburgh is where it is. Now, this coal field didn't last forever. And although you can still go to mines in western Pennsylvania and you can go inside them and you can knock out some coal, it did not deplete entirely. But the production from where it was in the 1940s has been greatly reduced. This is from the geological resources. I have the link here below, and I'll put it in the description block. But what you can see is if you look at employees, and this is for the entire state of Pennsylvania, most of the coal worker employees were in western Pennsylvania. But if you look at the employment numbers for coal workers and the production numbers here, I've highlighted, you went from about 100,000 people working in the coal industry in 1949 in Pennsylvania, and by 1960, only 30,000 people were employed, 33,000. And similarly, coal production went from about 100 million tons of coal, and it dropped roughly in half, to about 65 million tons of coal. So this was a tremendous collapse of employment in Pittsburgh and the western Pennsylvania. And it only occurred in a span of 10 years. So if we plot coal, now this is Pennsylvania coal production, most of which was, as you saw, located in western Pennsylvania surrounding Pittsburgh. But if you plot Pennsylvania's coal production versus Pittsburgh's population, you see the peak in coal production occurs around 1920. The peak in population occurs in 1950. So it's about 20 to 30 year difference from the peaks. But you see in 1950, there was a significant collapse in the coal production from 1950 to 1960. And more or less the population lagged for a few decades, lagged the peak by a few decades, and then began to fall off after the coal had begun to deplete. Steel production, and this is U.S. steel production, lagged the peaking of the coal, or lagged the coal collapse by a few decades. So we had the coal collapse more or less in 1950 to 1960. The peak of U.S. steel production was in 1971, or in 1971, 1972, and almost simultaneously, the completed U.S. steel building timed the peak near perfectly. It had completed construction in 1971. So if those of you familiar might be interested in the topic called the Skyscraper Index, it is sort of um, uses the completion of large skyscrapers in cities to predict market crashes. So I think it's interesting that the U.S. Steel Tower pretty much timed the peak of U.S. steel production, within a few years. So to summarize, the production of coal collapsed in the 1950s to 60s, and because we were able to bring in coal from other parts of the country, we delayed the steel production collapse by a few decades, but steel ultimately collapsed in the late 1970s and 80s, and hence the loss of the jobs in peripheral industries. So I think it's interesting. Again, I'm going back to my plot I showed you earlier with Pennsylvania coal production versus Pittsburgh population. And right here in the 1890s, late 1890s, or no, 1880s, early 1890s, Tesla actually came to work in Pittsburgh, and he worked with Westinghouse for a year to help produce the AC motors and generators. And it was in 1900 when he wrote this article about increasing human energy, where he sort of contemplates the exhaustion of coal fields in sort of a fugitive, speculative sense. So Tesla was, literally ahead of the curve in that sense. Now, as coal production peaked, declined, and then collapsed, it was after the collapse that you see some of the things that are attributed to economic decline. It was after coal collapsed when Rachel Carson, also of Pittsburgh, wrote Silent Spring. So the environmental movement, in my opinion, appears to be reactionary to some of the collapse in coal. When coal no longer supported the community, you could make cleanliness and environment a priority. That's a pet theory of mine. I'd be interested if anyone has any perspectives or wants to comment. Things like the welfare programs were, again, appeared after the collapse of population in the area had already begun. So LBJ implemented food stamps, Medicare, Medicaid, and 64 and 65, and the Education Act funded public schools, things like that, all occurred after this economic collapse had already begun, at least in Pittsburgh. And these workers were leaving and migrating to other parts of the country for work. Again, environmental protection didn't come until the 1970s. Environmentalism could gain support when there were no longer hundreds of people employed in the coal industry. The idea to open up China was perhaps a strategic move to get to use foreign energy resources to produce the goods and steel that we no longer had the coal to do ourselves. And of course, there was the energy crisis in the 70s that not only included coal and natural gas, but especially oil. So, and just as an anecdote, some anecdotal evidence, I talked to someone that had lived in Pittsburgh. They actually have the oldest house in East Pittsburgh, and at one time it had a coal furnace. And my friend recalls in the 50s and 60s when his grandparents owned the house and they were having the furnace replaced with natural gas. And I asked him, well, what was their main motivation? Was it just because it was cleaner? They didn't want to shovel coal anymore? And he said, well, I mean, although it was cleaner and they didn't like shoveling coal, the main reason that they went from coal to natural gas was they could no longer get the coal delivery trucks to come and deliver coal. So they probably weren't going to switch over to natural gas, except with the exception of the fact that they can no longer get trucks to deliver coal. So again, this supports the hypothesis that it was really a lack of coal supply that forced the transition to natural gas and forced steel out of the area. So again, I'll just summarize my thesis, is that the data indicates that the rapid decline in the primary energy source coal occurred before the population decline of the Pittsburgh area. So coal went away, then people started to go away. The decline in Pittsburgh steel production lagged decline in regional coal supply by 1 to 2 decades, and primarily due to extended coal supply chains beyond Appalachian region. Federal policies on social welfare, environment, energy, and tapping foreign labor and energy were at best reactionary attempts to mitigate the effects of diminished domestic energy supply. So I'd be interested to hear in the comments if anybody has any thoughts of this. So yeah, I do not blame some of these things as causing the loss of industry in the area. I kind of sort of think they were reactions to a phenomenon that was occurring in the Midwest related to energy. Pittsburgh population declined from its peak, about 700,000 people in 1950, to 350,000 in 1990. So it was approximately 50% loss of population over 40 years. Primarily, Pittsburgh relocated to different parts of the United States for job opportunities. And this is an interesting graphic I found that just shows, these circles kind of show where Pittsburghers went to when they left the area. So this population collapse was, fortunately, it was a migratory collapse. It wasn't as though people were dying or something, but nevertheless, the population reduced by 50%. And some interesting questions I'd like to ask and get everyone's opinion on is, what will declining coal production look like for the entire U.S. or China or the world? So this is from BP. This is the global production of coal, with most of it being produced in the Asia Pacific. So another hypothesis is that everything's made in China because China's using all the coal, or 80% of the coal. So, but if we peak, and it does look like we're hitting a global peaking phenomenon with coal, what will the population look like in 40 years from now? Will we see a similar global population collapse like we did in Pittsburgh from the 1950s to the 1990s? Some other interesting questions: what are effective coping strategies for energy collapse? What kinds of behavior is common during a collapse? It's kind of interesting, having lived through the downward slide of this. I saw a lot of and how generally things kind of got worse. So, and you would think that maybe some political leaders would be coming to places like Pittsburgh and sort of studying the collapse and talking to people about how they stayed afloat and how they survived. But you don't really see that in the national dialogue. And could new energy resources reverse the collapse? So far, we haven't been successful. Westinghouse was one of the great nuclear power leaders, and it has more or less been stagnant for the last several decades. And an interesting question, this is a picture of another collapsed community, Wheeling, West Virginia. And could this be a sneak preview of some of the modern cities? I believe this is a picture of Shanghai right now, but in 40 years, after the collapse of global coal production, it could be like Wheeling, West Virginia. So if anybody in Asia is watching this, just take a trip to Wheeling, see it's the city of the future. So that's all I had on that topic. I think it's an important topic, and I hope we can think of some interesting ways to innovate and produce new energy resources. So yeah, be sure to comment. I'm interested to hear what the YouTube community thinks about the population collapse of Pittsburgh.